I woke up on my 60th birthday with a quiet hope that this year might be different. Maybe I would find a text from Marcus, a quick call from my sister, or even a card waiting in the mail. The house was still, the morning sunlight stretching across my living room. And for a brief moment, I let myself imagine a small acknowledgement, something to remind me I mattered. Scrolling through my phone out of routine more than expectation, I stopped cold. Facebook. Dozens of photos of my family laughing, balloons floating, a banner across the fireplace. My eyes caught the words almost immediately. Celebrating Emily, our shining star. My stomach sank. A party had been thrown last night, not for me, not even a belated celebration, but for Emily, my daughter-in-law. I clicked through the images, recognizing familiar faces: my mother, smiling broadly as she carried in a cake decorated in Emily's favorite colors. My father, arm around Emily as she opened a small jewelry box. Marcus, standing quietly in the corner, a half smile on his face. Then I saw it, his comment beneath the photos. At least someone's worth celebrating. The words stabbed at me more sharply than I expected. It wasn't just the party. It was the message that ran like an invisible thread through my life, my efforts, my sacrifices, my presence, all invisible, all secondary. A knot of hurt and disbelief twisted in my chest. I had spent decades nurturing, paying bills, supporting family members through crises. Yet here I was, erased from even a simple birthday acknowledgement. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the phone, my fingers hovering over the screen. Part of me wanted to comment, to voice the hurt, to demand recognition. Another part of me recoiled, knowing any reaction would probably be brushed aside, minimized, or dismissed as petty. The room felt suddenly too small, the silence around me amplifying the years of neglect that had led to this moment. I turned the phone over on the bed, pressing my palms to my eyes. 60 years, and this was the pattern I had come to expect: invisible, overlooked, taken for granted. My chest tightened, and I knew I could not simply let this pass. Not this time. Tomorrow, I decided, would be the first day I began thinking of myself. I've spent most of my life on the sidelines, giving without expectation and quietly shouldering burdens no one else seemed willing to carry. From the earliest days, I was the responsible one, paying bills, cooking meals, arranging appointments, and keeping the household running when my parents or Marcus were too distracted to notice. I celebrated milestones in secret, saved money for emergencies, and made sure no one around me went without. Emily, on the other hand, seemed to glide through life effortlessly. From the moment she joined our family, she received praise for the smallest gestures: a thank you card, a tidy room, a smile. Somehow she was always our shining star. My achievements, no matter how significant, were quietly overlooked, noted only when convenient. I remember my first real heartbreak as a mother, trying to navigate the endless tension between supporting Marcus and tolerating the unspoken favoritism that had followed Emily into our lives. I learned to laugh at compliments that weren't mine, to downplay my successes at work, and to mask my frustration when my sacrifices went unnoticed. Even as an adult, I planned family dinners, organized holidays, and coordinated celebrations, while the spotlight always fell on Emily. Sometimes, the unfairness was subtle. A misplaced comment from a relative, a shared anecdote where my role was minimized, a birthday gift given lavishly to Emily while my own was forgotten. These were constant reminders that my presence was assumed, but rarely appreciated. And yet, I endured, thinking that loyalty meant self-erasure. I convinced myself that my worth wasn't tied to recognition, that love was enough to justify my invisibility. But as I sit here reflecting, The question grows louder with each passing year. When does loyalty stop being a virtue and become a cage that keeps you invisible tomorrow? I knew I would start examining what freedom might look like. For over 2 years, I had been quietly covering Emily's expenses, ensuring her apartment never went without rent and her utilities remained on. Each month, I logged into my accounts, transferred the money directly to her landlord, and kept meticulous records in a spreadsheet I had maintained for emergencies. I tracked due dates, amounts, and reminders from utility companies, anticipating every possible complication before it could reach her. None of it was asked for. I acted because I couldn't bear the thought of her being evicted or left without heat in the dead of winter. I coordinated with landlords through emails carefully worded to avoid revealing my involvement. Each time, I reminded myself that this was a temporary arrangement, a safety net, until she could manage on her own. I didn't tell Marcus, my parents, or anyone else. Lying by omission had become a second nature, a shield against the questions that would inevitably come. And yet, the frustration built silently. While I was covering her mistakes, the family celebrated her successes with photos, balloons, and social media posts. I scrolled past pictures of dinners, gift exchanges, and parties, each image tightening the knot in my chest. The admiration and praise she received felt undeserved, especially knowing how precarious her situation truly was. Sometimes I wondered if anyone would ever see the truth. My efforts, invisible to the family, rendered me irrelevant in their eyes, while Emily's dependence remained hidden behind a carefully maintained facade. I began to realize that my endurance, my patience, had become a kind of quiet imprisonment. It wasn't resentment exactly, more a growing clarity that if I continued this way, I would never be recognized, never be acknowledged for my sacrifices, and worst of all, never be free. Tomorrow, I decided I would start considering what it might mean to step back and let consequences finally reach their rightful owner. Seeing the photos on Facebook was the spark that ignited a realization I had been avoiding for far too long. The party for Emily, the smiles, the balloons, the careful captions, all of it screamed a truth I could no longer ignore. My efforts, my sacrifices, my quiet support had failed to earn acknowledgement or respect. Enabling her had only allowed the cycle to continue, and the pattern was too familiar, too ingrained to pretend it wasn't hurting me anymore. I thought back to birthdays, past my own celebrations forgotten, reduced to a text message at best, while extravagant gestures were reserved for Emily. I remembered the holidays where my meticulous planning went unnoticed, the countless times I had rearranged schedules, covered bills, or lent money, only to be invisible in the family's eyes. The sting of it accumulated over decades, each slight compounding into a weight I could no longer carry silently. The anger was quiet at first, simmering beneath the surface, but it grew into a firm resolve. I realized that if I continued to absorb their disregard, I would remain invisible for the rest of my life. It wasn't about punishment or revenge. It was about self-respect, about reclaiming the boundaries I had long ignored. I had spent years ensuring everyone else's comfort while sacrificing my own recognition, and it was time to put an end to that. I began planning, carefully but decisively. The spreadsheet of transfers, the landlord emails, the notes about utilities, all of it would remain, but the next step would be mine alone. I would assert boundaries, take control of my finances, and no longer enable behavior that undermined my worth. It would be a measured act, deliberate and unwavering, a signal that I would no longer be invisible in my own life. As the evening closed in, I sat quietly, feeling the first flickers of empowerment after years of self-effacement. I knew the road ahead would be tense, that it would test my patience, my resolve, and my relationships. But for the first time in decades, I felt capable of standing firm. Tomorrow, I would begin the process of gathering evidence, preparing to confront not only Emily's behavior, but the family's pattern of disregard. I spent the morning pulling up bank statements, scrolling through 2 years of transfers, invoices, and reminders. Every payment I had made for Emily's rent, utilities, and unexpected emergencies was meticulously logged, each one a silent testament to my endurance. I opened my email folders, searching for correspondence with landlords, utility companies, and even her workplace, piecing together the pattern I had known existed but had been too polite or too exhausted to confront. Emily's misrepresentations were glaring once I examined them closely. Emails from her boutique confirming she had been terminated months earlier. Notices from the utility company that had been accidentally forwarded to me instead of her. And messages from her landlord begging for payments she had not made, all painted a consistent picture. She had been living off my support while presenting a facade of stability and employment to the family, and no one had questioned it. I organized the documents into a single folder, labeling them by date and type, so that if I needed to present them, the truth would be indisputable. Each file I saved was another brick in the foundation of the case I was building, not to humiliate Emily, but to protect myself from continued exploitation and to finally assert my boundaries. As I worked, I reflected on my years of silent enabling. I had convinced myself that helping her, even at my own expense, was a form of love. But love without reciprocity, without respect, had become a form of erasure. The careful record-keeping and organization were not just about stopping the immediate problem, they were about reclaiming my agency and refusing to continue being invisible. I drafted mental strategies for conversations I would have with the landlord, with Emily, and eventually with Marcus and the rest of the family. Each step had to be deliberate, ethical, and uncompromising. I would not allow my empathy to be twisted into a weapon against me, nor would I relinquish the power I had silently maintained for too long. By nightfall, the folder was complete, the plan forming in my mind. Tomorrow, I would take the first step toward enforcement, sending the signals that things were about to change. I took a deep breath and logged into my bank account. The spreadsheet opened beside me. The automatic transfer that had quietly covered Emily's rent for months would not run this time. I made a final payment to settle her current balance and sent a concise email to the landlord, explaining that all future payments would be Emily's responsibility. There was no judgment in the message, only fact. She needed to manage her obligations directly from now on. Almost immediately, the tension began. Emily's phone rang incessantly, messages piling up faster than I could track. Her tone shifted from confusion to panic as she realized the payments had stopped. I ignored the calls, letting her face the immediate consequences. Somewhere in the background, I could almost hear the ripple of concern moving through the family as subtle inconsistencies in her narrative began to surface. Marcus texted me later that evening, his words carefully neutral. Did Emily say why the landlord called? His question was hesitant, uncertain, betraying the first cracks in his trust of her story. I did not answer right away. I wanted him to see, not hear, that actions had consequences. The unease that had been quietly building for months now pulsed sharply through the house. Emily scrambled to cover her tracks. Family members started asking questions, and for the first time, I felt the power of restraint. It wasn't cruel. It was necessary. I realized that stepping back could provoke chaos, but it also forced accountability in a way words never had. As night settled over Chicago, I watched her struggle to manage the reality I had imposed. My decision had been deliberate, firm, and irrevocable. Tomorrow, I would confront the patterns I had long tolerated and force a reckoning with not just Emily, but the family that had silently condoned her behavior. The doorbell rang just as I was finishing dinner, my hands still warm from the dishes I had reluctantly cleaned. Through the peephole, I saw Emily, Marcus, and my parents standing in the hallway, expressions tense and guarded. I opened the door but stepped back, blocking the entrance, forcing the air between us to thrum with unspoken tension. Emily pushed forward first, her voice sharp. "You need to fix this now. The landlord says I have 3 days to pay or get out." I held my ground, keeping my voice calm. "I cannot fix this for you. Emily, you made choices. I have only stopped enabling them. You are responsible for the consequences." Marcus stepped slightly ahead of Emily, trying to mediate, but his eyes darted nervously between us. My parents flanked her, their faces a mixture of frustration and confusion. "Lorna, please," my mother said, voice tight. "You've gone too far. This isn't a punishment, it's family." I shook my head. "It is not punishment, it is accountability. For decades, I've shouldered responsibilities while my efforts were ignored. While Emily was celebrated for mistakes I covered up. That ends now. I will no longer provide financial support under false pretenses." Emily's voice rose, a mixture of panic and indignation. "You're punishing me because they love me more." "No," I said firmly. "I am prioritizing myself. I am refusing to continue supporting someone who takes without appreciation, who misrepresents their situation, and who manipulates the family dynamic." My mother's hands trembled as she gestured. "You need to apologize and reinstate the payments. This has gone far enough." "I will not," I said. "I am setting boundaries. My support does not extend to enabling dishonesty. If anyone wants to remain in my life, they will respect that." A long silence fell, broken only by Emily's sharp intake of breath. Marcus looked down, no words coming, as if weighing his allegiance. My father finally cleared his throat. Hesitant, "Lorna, we didn't realize. I've waited too long for recognition," I said, looking each of them in the eyes. "This is the reckoning. I will no longer be invisible." The room felt charged, the weight of decades pressing on all of us. I could see fear flicker in Emily's eyes, the first real acknowledgement of consequence. Tomorrow, I would begin the next phase ensuring that the boundaries I had drawn were respected and that responsibility finally landed where it belonged. The days that followed were tense and unrelenting. Messages flooded my phone, Emily pleading, my mother guilt-tripping, my father offering rationalizations, Marcus caught somewhere in between. Each attempt to sway me tested the resolve I had spent decades building, but I refused to waver. I did not respond to the frantic texts immediately. I let the consequences settle naturally. Emily's panic was palpable. She called her friends, frantically searching for a roommate to share the rent. She applied for positions she had long avoided, dusting off resumes and filling out applications with an urgency I had never seen before. For the first time, she had to confront the reality of her choices without my silent intervention cushioning her every step. Meanwhile, I found myself experiencing something unfamiliar, a quiet pride in my own decisions. For decades, my empathy and patience had been exploited, my presence taken for granted. Now, standing firm felt like an act of self-respect as much as accountability. Each time Emily faced a setback she had previously avoided, I reminded myself that I was not being cruel. I was insisting that responsibility match privilege, that consequences align with actions. Even my son, Marcus, seemed to shift subtly, observing Emily's attempts at independence with a newfound awareness. He did not intervene on her behalf as quickly, letting her grapple with the outcomes she had long evaded. My parents, though still frustrated, began to see the firmness in my stance, recognizing perhaps for the first time the breadth of my contributions and the pattern of favoritism they had allowed. I spent my evenings reflecting on the past and on the life I had almost surrendered to their expectations. The empowerment I felt was tangible, a moral victory not over anyone else but over the inertia that had long dictated my choices. As Emily slowly took steps toward self-sufficiency, I realized the significance of maintaining boundaries. It was not only protection for myself, but a lesson for those who had relied on my invisibility for comfort. Tomorrow, I would watch the results of these changes take hold, observing how accountability reshaped the family dynamic and my own sense of freedom. The weeks that followed felt surreal, yet liberating. Without the constant obligation of covering Emily's rent or monitoring her bills, I could focus fully on my own life. At work, I threw myself into projects I had long postponed, and my efforts did not go unnoticed. My manager offered a promotion, one with greater responsibility and a modest relocation package to the Chicago office. For the first time in decades, my professional achievements were recognized without comparison or dismissal. Each morning, I settled into routines that nourished my independence, preparing breakfast without rushing to anticipate someone else's needs, walking to the nearby park for fresh air, and spending evenings reviewing my personal finances, something I had long deferred. The sense of control was invigorating. I no longer measured my life against the chaos of Emily's choices or the family's expectations. Meanwhile, Emily began to adjust to the reality I had imposed. She found a roommate to share her apartment, applied for full-time positions she had ignored for years, and slowly started taking responsibility for her own finances. The transformation was awkward and uneven, but it was real. Marcus, too, began observing her efforts with an awareness that had previously been absent. He no longer automatically defended her. Instead, he seemed to measure actions against consequences, a subtle but meaningful shift. At home, the family dynamic started to recalibrate. My parents, though initially frustrated, gradually acknowledged my contributions in small, tentative ways. A thank you note left on the kitchen counter, a quiet mention of my promotion during dinner, or a brief conversation that did not revolve around Emily. While it was not full reconciliation, it was recognition, a sign that years of invisibility might finally be challenged. I found myself reflecting on the past, realizing how much time I had lost to silent, enabling, and unacknowledged labor. Yet the clarity I felt now was undeniable. I was capable of achieving both personal and professional fulfillment without compromising my integrity or self-respect. Emily's slow progress, Marcus's cautious support, and my parents' tentative recognition created a space where growth was possible not just for them, but for me. I allowed myself to feel the quiet satisfaction of standing firm and witnessing the first ripples of change. Tomorrow, I would explore how these adjustments continued to shift the family dynamic and solidify the boundaries I had established, ensuring that respect for my life and choices became permanent. I spent the morning reviewing my calendar, noting achievements I had quietly accomplished over the years, projects completed, promotions earned, milestones reached, none of which had been celebrated by my family. For the first time in decades, I allowed myself to acknowledge them fully, savoring the sense of pride I had long suppressed. I treated myself to a small celebration, a quiet brunch at my favorite cafe, a thoughtful purchase I had delayed, and a walk through the park where I could reflect without interruption. Each step reinforced the boundaries I had established, the hard line I had drawn between my generosity and my self-respect. The lessons of the past month settled in clearly fairness requires action. Recognition begins with oneself, and personal agency cannot be ceded to anyone else, no matter how close they are. I understood that love and loyalty do not demand invisibility. They thrive alongside respect and integrity. As evening fell, I sat in my apartment, feeling the weight of decades lift. Independence was no longer abstract, it was tangible, lived, and empowering. Peace was not a distant promise. It was the space I had carved for myself, free from the manipulation and favoritism that had long dictated my life. Tomorrow, I would continue moving forward, guided by the clarity and strength I had finally embraced, knowing that my life was now truly mine.